I think a little bit of green mood lighting is appropriate because today we are talking about the newest found footage film in my collection, Frogman. I gotta be honest, I'd never heard of this movie. Kind of came out of nowhere. Apparently it was released earlier this year. I wasn't even entirely sure it was a 2024 movie, and I had to do quite a bit of digging and found very little information on it. Played at a couple of festivals, reviewed fairly highly, sitting around 78%, I think. It was intriguing. Then I found out it was a found footage film and thought, well, I haven't seen one of those in a while, let's go ahead and give it a shot. I thought I knew my cryptids quite well, but this movie is based on a real cryptid, apparently. I learned this after the fact. I thought the movie was entirely fictionalized. I mean, it is, but inspired by an actual existing cryptid legend. I wasn't familiar with the Loveland Frogman. This is all new to me. The Frogman is described as standing roughly 4 feet tall, allegedly spotted in Loveland, Ohio. In 1972, the Loveland Frog legend gained renewed attention when a Loveland police officer reported to a colleague that he had seen an animal consistent with the descriptions of the Frogman. After reported sightings in 2016, a second officer called a news station to report that he had shot and killed the same creature some weeks after the 1972 incident and had identified it as a large iguana that was missing a tail. I don't suppose there's a ton of evidence to support this one. The movie certainly plays into the fact that the town is just, milking the legend for tourism, which is, what Point Pleasant does for the Mothman. It's what all these towns do to support these cryptid myths. As I said, the movie is a found footage film, so it opens immediately with found footage. Starts in 1999 with a family vacation out in Loveland, Ohio. I really like the fact that the movie does address that towns like this do just kind of milk these legends for tourism and monetary gain. That's not a new angle, and it is the harsh reality of all of these cryptids. As much as I would love to believe in the Mothman and the Jersey Devil and all that, it's all just in good fun. These things very likely do not exist, but they're fun to believe in. Where this movie takes a turn is when you realize that the monster is real, and the relationship that the town has to the monster is an interesting, if not underdeveloped angle. Without going into too many spoilers, I'll tell you, the biggest problem this movie has is an issue that a lot of found footage films have, and that is, it's about a 25-minute story stretched out to feature length. At 80 minutes long, the story doesn't really begin until about the 57-minute mark, and you don't find out the town's relationship to the monster until the last, 10 minutes at that. When you do find out what's going on, you're left just wanting more answers. There's not really a whole lot of questions left on the table, but you don't really feel too satisfied with the explanation of anything. There really isn't an explanation of anything. As I said, the movie is a found footage film, and it starts fairly strong. It's compelling. We start with old family footage of a family vacation set in 1999 in a town called Loveland, Ohio, where they're out exploring the waterfront when a young 10-year-old boy looks out and sees the mythological Frogman. He catches it on film, and then we jump forward 20 years and see that the sighting of this Frogman has been eating away at him the entire time. He needs proof that this thing exists. This movie reminded me a lot of the Blair Witch Project in more ways than just it's a found footage film. A lot of the character tropes and the set and just the ambience reminded me a lot of it. Now, sadly, this movie's not as well put together as the Blair Witch Project, and obviously in 2024, found footage films are not nearly or even remotely believable like the Blair Witch Project was 25 years ago. But Frogman does do some things pretty well. But first I want to dive into some of the negatives just to get those out of the way, because I don't have a lot of them. Starting off with what is probably the film's biggest shortcoming is the poor performances from our cast. There's really only 3 actors in the movie, and while they all do okay, none of them are good enough to convince you that this footage we're seeing is actually real. And that's something the movie really wants you to believe, is that this is real cryptid footage. From the very beginning, all the way up to the moments the credits roll, even into a technically mid-credits scene, although there's no substance to it, the movie never lets up that this is real. But the actors are not convincing enough. Our main character is a guy by the name of Dallas, who 20 years before this film took place, in the opening sequence of the movie, he saw the legendary cryptid of the Frogman, and it's been eating away at him for 20 years. He needs proof that this thing exists. He is obsessed with it. And when you see where he's at in his life and how little he's actually accomplished, you start to understand why he hyperfixates on this thing. It's the only thing in his life that he feels has any meaning. And because of that, he drags his two friends into the woods with him to go try and find this Frogman. Now, I'll tell you, the movie makes pretty good use of its runtime, but it could still be shaved down by about 5 to 10 minutes, and I think the things that need to be cut out to make the movie stronger are the unnecessary romance angles between Dallas and Amy. Amy was an ex-lover of his. There's this whole blah, 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 blah. None of it matters, and it doesn't amount to anything. It's only in there so that we can have like an added layer of relatability to these characters. But quite frankly, if you're going into a movie called The Frogman, you're not going in there for great characters. You want to see the goddamn Frogman. And we do get to see the Frogman. And the Frogman is pretty cool. He's creepy. Kind of reminded me a little bit of the frog from South Park, but it's serviceable. It does the job, and to the best of my knowledge, although I don't have a whole lot of knowledge on the Loveland Frogman, it's pretty accurate to the myth. The design, the behavior, what it does to people, that's what the myth says happens. So it is very true to that, and it's entertaining. The movie is kind of a slow burn. Well, not kind of, very much a slow burn. You're never bored with it, but you are always waiting for a sighting of the Frogman. And nothing really creepy happens until about the 57-minute mark. But once that happens, the last 20 minutes of the movie are pretty damn entertaining. We learn more, we see more, we get creeped out, there's chases, I don't want to spoil it, but we start to learn what the relationship between the town and the Frogman is, and it's more than just a myth that they're gaining monetary value off of. It's not just saying, hey, we have this cryptid, come see it. No, there's actual behavior going on. And there are little nuggets set up earlier in the film that sort of kind of get payoffs later, just enough to make it feel like they weren't a total waste of time. But by the time the credits roll, you are kind of left there thinking like, hey, this was an 80-minute movie, and there was only about 15 to 20 minutes of substance in it. It's very good substance, but is it too little too late? For me, almost, but not quite. As I said before, I'm not familiar with the cast, but I'm also not familiar with the director, a man by the name of Anthony Cousins, who, in my little bit of research I did on this movie after watching it, apparently has somewhat of a following for another series of films he worked on called Scare Package. I had to look it up. I couldn't even remember. I've never seen it. I've never even heard of Scare Package. But apparently the first one is pretty well liked, so maybe I'll look into that one. But I am interested to see what he does next, because I like a lot of the stuff that he did in the third act of this movie. He set up some intriguing creeps by having like little seeds of, ooh, maybe the Frogman is watching us. We see the reaction that people have to the Frogman, and there is something at the end of this movie that I don't know if it's accurate to the legend, but it reminded me a lot of H.P. Lovecraft. Given how this movie ended and where the main character Dallas was left off, I would actually be very intrigued if Anthony Cousins decided to do a sequel to this film where Dallas goes back to Loveland, Ohio to document the town itself, while this movie focuses on his personal search for the Frogman. I think it would be really great if he went back to document what the town is doing with the Frogman, uncover more of the mystery. And I think that would be a much more intriguing film because there would be a lot more story to tell. Whereas this one was just a desperate man trying to prove that something he saw when he was a kid was real. There wasn't a whole lot of stake to it other than he just doesn't feel accomplished with his life and had to obsess over something. It could have been anything. But for him, it happened to be the Frogman. But now he has a personal vendetta against what happened. I think I'm going to touch on a spoiler here, so I'll put a big spoiler warning up, and if you're not interested in this, just skip over. When you see the spoiler bar, go away. But here's what it is. At the end of the movie, we find out that the town of Loveland has an underground cult where they're worshiping and making sacrifices to the Frogman, where they give him young women that he can impregnate to help reproduce and spawn more frog people, I suppose. Now, we don't get any word on where the origin of the Frogman came from, but we know how he continues to live. I don't think he's an immortal creature. I think he just is constantly reproducing, and then eventually he dies and there's another Frogman. And we get to see one of the girls sacrificed give birth to a new frog creature. It's disgusting and terrifying, and that's the stuff that I want more of. Focus more on what the cult is doing. Focus more on how they're sacrificing, how they choose the women that they sacrifice, and why do they do it to begin with? Why do they want the Frogman there? These are all things that we just kind of get like little sprinkles of, but they don't talk about it enough. So fingers crossed that Anthony Cousins actually decides to do a sequel to this, because I think there's a lot of potential here. But now this is where I want to hear from you guys. Have you seen Frogman? Have you even heard of Frogman? Were you familiar with the legend of Frogman that inspired the movie in the first place? It was a no from me on all accounts 24 hours ago, but I'm happy I got to check it out, and I do recommend you guys go see it. Like I said, let me know what you guys think in the comments, and we'll be back for the next one.